But we're pretty much going to go over all of the different stuff today in time remaining. So, okay, so just starting from the beginning, I mean, basically we started out talking about just basic terms of anatomy. I mean, I'm just going out of the notes. Right? So some of this stuff are things that you're going to need to know, because this is your basic anatomy class, and it's going to be used for other things you're going to do from here on out. Right? Pretty much always you need to know what anatomical position is, right? And then the different planes of the body. You know, frontal plane, sagittal plane, coronal plane, all that stuff, transverse. And then you need to know like the different pairs of terms. We got anterior and posterior, superior, inferior, medial, lateral, superficial, deep, ipsilateral, contralateral, all those types of things. And then different regional terms as far as if you say tarsal or dorsal, axillary, brachium. There's a lot of this stuff. You need to know it for functional stuff for anatomy, but a lot of it is going to be for point location. Like a lot of the stuff that we're going to do for palpation is going to be based on, because you need to know that later when you do point location. And some of the stuff I'll show on here in a minute, you'll see what I'm talking about. Right, and then what's the two different parts of the skeleton that we talked about? Axial and appendicular. So what's the axial skeleton? Skull and spine. Okay. So then in the rib cage, right? Right. And that includes the sacrum, right? But what about this one here? No. So that's part of appendicular. The innominate or ostox or whatever you want to call it. So then that leaves for the appendicular skeleton, it's going to be the shoulder girdle, the bones of the arm, the pelvis, and then the bones of the lower extremity. And then we went through all the different, different bones of the skull, and a lot of that's going to be important because you're going to talk about different anatomical locations for palpation and things like the mastoid, the temporal area, the frontal bone. So you need to review, make sure you understand what the different bones of the skull. And then the rest of the axial skeleton, know the different things about the vertebra. And which vertebrae doesn't have a spinous process? C1, which is the atlas. Okay. And then the other thing, and did we go over in palpation? I don't know if we did for the transverse process of the atlas.
No.
Okay, well, basically we'll go over that. Basically, it's just right below the mastoid. Okay, so if you feel the lump going underneath, now there's a lot of tissue over it, so it's not like you're going to feel the bone the same way as you do with the mastoid process. But you can sort of come underneath it and you'll feel, and then that's what your head is rotating.
What was the question?
I was just saying, palpating the transverse process of the atlas. Okay. And then just knowing the basic structure of the rib and how it articulates with the spine. And how many cervical vertebrae are there? 7, right? How many thoracic? 12. Lumbar? 5. Sacrum? 5. Okay, but then they get fused as someone becomes an adult. And then we talked a little bit about some of the point location related things on the face. Let's see. Okay, so here's some of the things where it comes down to needing to know for points. Back here you have the inner canthus and the outer canthus. And then we talked about the infraorbital foramen. Because like when you start learning point stuff, it's going to say stuff like this. 1 cm below the pupil in the depression of the infraorbital fossa. Or it'll say, in the medial canthus or inner canthus. And then there was before, on one of the palpation things, it talks about the apex of the ear, and that's basically going to be the top of the ear right here. And the way you can find it for sure is if like you fold the ear like that, that's the part that comes to a point like that. And it's not so much that there's a point on that spot, but there's one of the points that talks about that it's on the skull, that it's just above the apex of the ear. And so we went through and did, locating the different bones of the skull. Okay, so like here, this one says directly level with the apex of the ear. So that's why you need to know all these different landmarks, because when it comes to point location, you really know. And then we talked about the tragus, which is this little part that sticks out in the ear, right? And then in some of the books, the acupuncture books, it varies a little bit different. Some books talk about supratragic notch, which is the one above the tragus, and then infratragic notch, which is below that, or intertragic notch is, I think, is another word they use for the infratragic, like here. So this point is going to be, it says between the intertragic notch, posterior and the condyloid process of the mandible. And remember we talked about the two different processes on the mandible, right? You have the condyloid and then the coronoid. Yeah, so that's here. Okay, so you have the coronoid, and then this is the mandibular condyle, or they'll refer to it in some acupuncture books as the condyloid process. And then here's the angle of the mandible. Remember we went over all this with palpation before. Okay, so we'll go over this stuff when we start doing into palpation, but I just want to go over a couple other things. We talked a lot about bones and just the basic physiology about them. There's not going to be that much on the spinal related to that, but if you just understand the basics of it, like what are the different cells that are in the bone that have to do with building up and breaking down the bone? Yeah, osteoblasts, those are the ones that do what? Build the bone, then you have osteoclasts that break it down, and then osteocytes. And then the different membranes on the bone, right? You have the periosteum. Okay. And then we also talked a lot about joints. So then there's different classifications of joints. They want to review all that stuff with the different things like synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis, diarthrosis, synovial joints. And then we talked about categorizing each of the different joints, like you have hinge joints, ball and socket joints, planar joints. So just review those things. And then there were some general things that we talked about with muscles. So how many different types of muscle tissue are there? Three. Okay, so it's going to be skeletal muscle, cardiac, and smooth muscle. So you want to know just the basic characteristics of how those differ between each other. And then we talked about different terms related to muscle as far as prime movers, agonists, antagonists, synergists, fixators. So you want to understand what those are. And then what are the different types of muscle contractions? What's that? I can say that a little bit louder. Yeah, concentric and well, first you have isometric and isotonic. And then out of those isotonic, you have concentric and eccentric. So isometric is when the muscle contracts without moving, and then isotonic is when it's moving. And then you have concentric is when the muscle contracts, shortens while it's contracting, and then eccentric is when it lengthens while it contracts. A lot of times when you're doing different movements, you have concentric contractions and eccentric contractions. You want to understand the difference between those.